Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about resource leveling and early start S-curves, or as we like to call it, level it, then push. Let's just jump straight into a scenario that hits at the absolute heart of major project planning. Picture this. You're looking at your schedule for a massive offshore commissioning project. You get to week 41 and your logic-driven plan says, hey, we're going to need 310 people this week to get the work done. But there is a huge, literally insurmountable problem. 310 people. On your resource histogram, this is just a violent, massive spike. I mean, maybe the week before you only needed 40 people, right? And the week after, maybe 60. But week 41, 310. Imagine a helicopter trying to land on your offshore platform to drop all these folks off, but that red personnel on board counter, your POB, is already completely maxed out. Why? Because the platform only holds 120 beds total. Okay, let's dive into this, because a schedule that demands 310 people when you literally only have 120 beds, that's not a plan. That is a wish. So our entire goal today is to take that impossible wish and transform it into a rock-solid plan that can actually be manned and executed in the real world. To fix this, you really need to understand that there are two distinct profiles you have to produce. And yeah, you absolutely need both. First, there's time analysis. That's your spiky, theoretical profile. It assumes you have infinite resources, basically telling you the absolute shortest duration to get the project done in a perfect world. But then you have the resource-constrained profile. This one applies your real physical limits, things like beds, bunks, helicopter flights, craft availability. This tells you the duration you can actually deliver. And this brings us to a fundamental truth of project management. The gap between that theoretical shortest duration and the realistic resource-constrained duration, that gap is your honest risk. You have to know exactly what that risk is before you can even attempt to manage it. So, how do we smooth out those violent spikes and bring our theory in line with reality? The answer is resource leveling. It's exactly what it sounds like. You take activities that carry a bit of extra time, which we call float, and you just slide them around within those float windows. As you slide them, those crazy demand spikes flatten out, and your overall resource curve finally stops breaching that hard ceiling of 120 beds. Basically, leveling is just a very real conversation between your physical resource limits and the float you own. Let's walk through the exact steps to do this. First, you find the float. Second, you slide those non-critical activities. Third, you make sure the demand actually fits under your resource ceiling. But pay close attention to the fourth step, because this is the golden rule. Never touch the critical path. Critical path activities simply do not move. They have absolutely no float to give. In a leveled schedule, those critical path bars, they stay locked in place, glowing red. Now, once your resources are leveled, what keeps the pressure on? That would be the early start S-curve rule. You must build and manage your progress S-curve based on early start dates. Always. This curve is going to sit well above a curve built on late start dates. Why? Because it's deliberately more demanding. It forces the field to push early. It's exactly like leaving for the airport. You can leave when you could, or you can leave when you must. If you manage against late start dates, it's like leaving at the absolute latest possible second. By definition, if you fall behind a late start curve, you're already out of float. You'll have consumed your entire project buffer before anyone even notices you're behind. Look, both travelers arrive at the airport on a good day, but only one survives a traffic jam. And when you're working offshore, there is always a traffic jam. We're talking weather delays, supply boats such as don't sail, maybe a critical vendor whose visa somehow didn't come through in time. On a massive 3-year execution cycle, that early start buffer is typically the only thing standing between a slipped module and a slipped first oil date. That buffer is literally your lifeline. All right, let's put you in the hot seat with a practical scenario. Imagine your leveled plan calls for 210 people, but your personnel on board limit caps at 180. You currently hold 4 weeks of total float on your non-critical work. So, what's your move? How do you fix this without blowing up the project? Well, you have 3 levers, and you need to pull them in this exact order. Number 1, re-level your non-critical work into that 4 weeks of float. If that doesn't get you under the 180-person limit, you move to lever 2, shift whatever scope you can onshore. Onshore hours are way cheaper, and beds aren't rationed like they are in the middle of the ocean. Only if both of those failed, you pull lever 3, which is extending the window. You only use this as a last resort because extending the window directly costs you the project's end date. So let's take a step back and look at what we've covered. You came in with a logic-driven wish that demanded 310 people for 120 beds. You now know how to look at time analysis versus a resource-constrained reality. You know how to level activities using float while fiercely protecting your critical path. And you know exactly why your progress S-curves absolutely must be built on early start dates. You can actually hand a planner a clear, executable instruction now. But before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. We just established that resource leveling runs entirely on spending your float. But do you actually know exactly what kind of float you're spending? Because if you think all float is the exact same, you're walking straight into a trap. Total float is very different from free float, and negative float means your schedule is already completely broken. But, well, that's a whole other fascinating conversation for next time. Thanks for hanging out, and keep learning.